Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurmamritam Gamaya Aviravirmayedi Rudrayakte dakshinang mukham te namam pahi nityam. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. My subject this morning is do not seek him, just see him. This sentence, which forms my subject, is a saying of Swami Vivekananda. And he uttered this in course of a discourse he gave in 1895 to a group of students in a retreat, a place called Thousand Island Park in St. Lawrence River. I think there were about 12 people in a cottage, and Swami Vivekananda lived there for some time with them. And those were quite unforgettable days. We have some records left by those who are part of that group. Some of you no doubt have read some of the notes that were taken of the Swami's talks and published under the title Inspired Talks. It is in course of one of these talks that he said, do not seek him, just see him. When I first read that book, that was many, many years ago, and I came upon that sentence, it seemed like a revelation to me. At first blush it would seem that it doesn't make much meaning. We do not see God, it is quite clear, we see the world and men. If you are seeing God, then there would not have been any doubt about his existence. And we know that there are many sincere seekers of truth who they feel they have not found any God at all. They have found matter, they found life and mind, they see these things existing and functioning, but of God they do not find any sign. And yet, in the face of such facts, because facts these are, the Swami says that we need not seek him, all that we have to do is to see him as if he is just present before us. He has not to be found out, he is not hidden. But we make a little effort to open our eyes and see him. Is it just one of those things in which you expressed a well-known truth under the guise of new language in order to make it piquant or emphatic and so on? Sometimes such statements are a disappointment after you have penetrated the beauty or the emphasis of the accent of the language. You come upon an old truth which appears as difficult of attainment as it has ever appeared to you in the guise you have known it. I do not think so. I think the Swami pointed out a fact which oftentimes is ignored by us, and because of which finding God becomes such a very difficult task. Now it must be very evident to you that if God does exist, He must be an object of our perception every moment. It could not be otherwise. And why do I say that? Because God is all-pervasive. He is infinite by His nature. If you say that that is an assumption, I would say that is not an assumption. If God were finite by nature or limited in any way, then we would not call Him God. We should give Him another term, another name. And then we should try to find out if there is any such thing, any such reality which is infinite in every respect. And if we do not find it, then we have to come to the conclusion that God did not exist. You could not think of something finite and give it the name God and then go on arguing all the other things that occur to your mind. So if God is God, that is to say if He is infinite, then it must be that He must be the object of our perception always, because if you assume that you are perceiving something which is not also God at the same time, then you would also conclude that that something is outside of God. At the moment you conclude that, you limit God. If you think that something else exists, if you think there is some existence outside of God, then both become limited by each other. And God could not be considered as limited. So God must be then the somewhere, even in every object that we perceive. Well, you might say that it is only a clever argument and no more than that. No, if it is clever, and I am using the word in a nice sense, if it is true, then you cannot escape this conclusion. Every moment you are perceiving God. Every moment. The Swami goes a little farther. I shall come to that point later on. But you see, if you just accept this fact, which I have tried to point out to you, that although you may not know it, you are perceiving God every moment, your whole search for God becomes a different proposition. Usually in theistic religions or any other forms of religion, God has been considered a far-off entity. And yet, oddly enough, every religion that has spoken of God has spoken of Him as infinite and eternal, but somehow by some kind of clever argument they have considered this infinite one far off, different from His creation and distant by Him. He is not on earth, although He has created this earth, and He is maintaining this earth by His power, yet He seems to be somewhere away from this earth. When you perceive anything of this earth, you are not perceiving God. That is their conclusion. I frankly confess that I do not see any cogency in this kind of statements. But however, that is the idea that has obsessed people who have been seeking for God. God is in His heaven, wherever heaven might be. God cannot be perceived in this life. He can be seen only after we have passed this life. That is to say, somehow time seems to be a barrier between ourselves and our vision of God. Some have even maintained that you actually never see God. If you are to see God, you would be annihilated by Him. Some religions have maintained that. Then what do? You go and live in the same world with Him as when you live in kingdom of God or kingdom of heaven. It does not necessarily mean that you have a vision of God. You live in a most extraordinarily perfect world, full of blessings, that's all. Here you also live under Him, God the King, But here climate is not so good. You see, in heaven, perfect climate. Accommodations wonderful. You see, that is summer vacation ad infinitum. Yeah. Of course, I don't know how you will like only being on vacation all the time, I don't know. But that's the picture. You do not see him. But you live in a perfect world, and since this imperfect world seems to be the cause of so much misery to ourselves, a perfect world should be free from all these miseries. That is, many people just think that. And I may mention here that there are also Hindus who hold that kind of view. They do not think of all the other things. Of course, we often speak of the very highest ideal of man's attainment, and that highest ideal is complete identification with God. It is not going to heaven or hell or any such place, because that is beyond space and beyond time. It is not that after death you realize that. Beyond all conditions, it is not that when you do this or when you do the other thing then you realize it. Beyond all conditions and time and space is that identification with God. And therefore there is no question about going to heaven or any such thing, or even to see him, as it is ordinarily understood, as a one person sees another person. There is also not that kind of question. That is a very high ideal, and I might say that, generally speaking, it is admitted that it is the highest realization possible for the soul. But then we have also, as I mentioned, we also have lower ideals, and one of these ideals would tell you that all you do when you realize your highest ideal is to go and live in the world where God lives, in a sort of heaven. And of course that in ideal existence, that is the last word you can speak of the destiny of the soul. Well, you see, these are various views, and all these views underlie an assumption about our own being, present state as well as it is potentiality. We do start with certain ideas. Just as in Christianity you start with the idea that God created the soul, God created us. In India we don't accept that. Yes, there are some probably who would say that, but majority of the Hindus would not accept that view, that God created the soul. The general view is that the soul is eternally existent. Nobody had to create it, just as you would not raise this question about God as to who created him. You also do not raise any question about the creation of the soul. The soul is never created. But you see, those fundamental things are rarely questioned. You read Western theologies or religious books, you find that it is all taken for granted that God created the souls. God created the earth, he created the heaven, he created Adam and Eve and everything he did, which is awfully nice, but you do not know that really it happened that way. Have you questioned that fact? You have to question this fact. Now, when you think scientifically, they will tell you that the fundamental thing is uncreate, whatever that might be, whether it could be considered a constituent of an atom or whatever you think, or hydrogen or any kind of thing you might think to be the original stuff. It was not created, it was there, and therefore they call it naturalism. Their view is naturalistic view. Nature existed in one form, has been continually undergoing change. It may be from our point of view, from chaos, order is coming. We like order, therefore we think it is an improvement. Maybe there are some who would like chaos, and they probably think the whole nature has degenerated. But anyhow, the assumption is that there is continual changes taking place in the original nature, whatever that might be. They do not say somebody created nature. Now you take for granted some of the things which you should examine. Now if you take the Indian point of view as regards the soul, you will find this proposition that God is not really far off becomes more reasonable to you. If you take for granted that the soul is uncreate, if something is uncreate, in other words eternal, it must be perfect. Only the eternal is perfect. I won't go into the elaboration of this truth, how the eternal alone is perfect, but you think a little and you will find that it must be so, because whatever is imperfect has to undergo change. And that which does not undergo change has to be perfect. And although there are various views in Indian systems of philosophy regarding the soul, if you melt all these views, you come to some basic ideas. And you might, if you forget philosophical niceties, you would come to this conclusion that the Indian view is the soul is perfect. I am mentioning this because you will read, for example, some interpretations of Vedanta philosophy like dualistic interpretation, in which the soul is not considered perfect. Not always it is capable of reaching perfection. Or even if you read the qualified monistic interpretation of Vedanta, there also it is said the soul actually undergoes two transformations. One is contraction and another is expansion. Through impurity, the soul becomes contracted. We, for example, according to their view, that is to say, our souls are contracted, therefore they are small and impure, incapable of perception of God. Then the same soul, when it has undergone purification, expands. But as Swami Vivekananda pointed out in course of one of his lectures in Calcutta, he pointed out that even if you admit their view, you also have to admit, although Ramanuja, who is the proponent of this view, he himself would not accept your conclusion, yet you have to admit that that which through expansion appears as perfect, it must be potentially perfect in its state of contraction. You have to admit that. If there is a beautiful, cloth you have, fabric, and you have folded it into a very small size, and when you open it up it looks wonderful, beautiful, wonderfully beautiful, it must be admitted that when it was folded it was also wonderfully beautiful, only its beauty was not evident. That which in contraction appears as imperfect and in expansion appears as perfect, you have to admit that perfection is latent even in this state of contraction. And although Ramanuja and others of his followers may not accept this view in the form in which Swami Vivekananda would like to put it, he cannot escape this conclusion. Many philosophers, they appear different or they hold their ground just because they would not face all the issues. You know, that is what we just have a louder voice, and when you bring out your objections, we just drown you out. Philosophers have got very loud voices. You for a moment don't think that they are very gentle and thoughtful people. They are nothing of the kind. Only those who can say yes to everyone, they are gentle. Only the monists can say yes to everyone. Yes, that's right. You're right. But why don't you go a little further? If you go a little further, you will come to monism. That's their view. They accept all the views. And then they say, now look here. Here is a little defect in your thinking. Don't you think so? Of course, he will talk loudly. Because that is the way. They stop all kinds of counter-arguments. That is what I have found. Of course, you may not agree with that attitude. Yes, everything is what it is, otherwise it is not ever. If anything ever attains perfection, it is always perfect, otherwise it never attains to perfection. How do you like that view? I think you should like it immensely. You see? You, people of modern age, you are free people. You do not have a huge book or a huge church over your head, so that you cannot even dare to think differently from the book. You know, humanity lived through that state for centuries and centuries and centuries. You probably don't think so. You are all emancipated people. But one could not just think think a thought in their own heart. That mind became so paralyzed through fear or through habit, couldn't think about it. But now those days are gone. You are democratic people, in your heart there is this belief, not only are you born equal, you have got all kinds of potentialities within you. It just requires a little effort. That is all what is needed. And then you can attain anything which you like, although I don't agree with that view. Maybe I am not fully democratic. And I don't believe that if you just practice every day 12 hours or 15 hours, unless you have, you see, musical talents, that you will really become a singer. I don't believe it. See. Maybe you will just improve your harsh voice a little. And you don't have any sense of music. If you practice every day, might be that you will lose even what you have. It's possible. That much improvement there would be, I admit that. You see, I always make a distinction. I say there are talents which are accidental. And there are certain things, I won't call them talents, which are essential to our being. You can be infinitely moral. Nobody could take away from moral courage and moral vigor from you. Just practice it and you become a fully moral person, and you also will become a fully spiritual person if you just practice it. Nobody can take that away from you. But whether you would be a poet or whether you would be a singer, or whether you would be a wrestler or whether you would be a captain of industry, all these things require very special talents in this competitive world. That's just an accidental thing. So if you believe that in that kind of equality, that you could become like any great singer and a great poet, just all that you have to do, make a little effort, I won't agree with you. If you say, why not? If we make an effort, would not some result come out of it? Yes, it would. But how long will you continue this effort? That's the one point. You may say, I shall continue all my life. I shall sing 15 hours a day, practice it. Well, of course, provided the neighbors permit you to do it. Well, suppose you do it. But after you die, of course, if you believe in just one but, then there is the end of it. I don't think the angels will stand all these musical practices when you go to heaven. You see, that is too disharmonious. Heaven is full of harmony. You cannot just go on screeching there. But if you believe in reincarnation, you see, there is a chance that you would practice. But it so happens, however, that mind is so devious, and that when you would be born, you will just forget that you have to become a great musician. You just take into your head that you want to be a rich man. And you just go on running after money. Music has taken to wings. There are all these kinds of difficulties, you know. So I have a profound doubt whether that kind of equality can be reached. And for my part, I don't care whether that kind of equality is had or not. This craze for talents that you have in the West is a source of great misery to you. You judge yourself one another by all these peculiar things that you have. You have to have something peculiar to show off. If you don't have it, you suffer from inferiority complex. Out of that comes superiority complex. Out of that comes hatred, anger, and all kinds of things come. See, and there is no end to it. See? Why you have to run after things which are not essentially yours? That really is a source of puzzle to me. I would not say that in India also people don't do it, but much less. Probably you will say, oh, you are all subject people, you didn't have any opportunity. I think subject or not subject, efforts in India directed towards achievement of moral and spiritual life, then all these accidental virtues. I would not give you the idea that those accidental things are not developed, because men are born. There are always, in every community, men are born with peculiar powers and talents, and they cultivate them. That's enough. There's plenty. You see what trouble is a great singer you have. Well, next Here another great singer comes, and the first great singer is in the shadow. You could not enjoy him or her for a long time. Discarded. Always you are discarding things. Good things come up, competition discards all those things. And life is not enjoyable, therefore. Well, to go back to my own poem. Yes, we don't believe in these things, this kind of equality, but other kind of equality we believe in. If you make an effort, you could become a spiritual giant, every single one of you. As a matter of fact, that's our destiny. You boil down all philosophies. If anyone says, yes, you will become perfect, you will go to heaven and live a perfect life, then he is saying without knowing it that you are perfect now, here and now. He may not know what he is talking about. He does not know the implications of it. It is as it were he had found a stone. You did not know that it was a big diamond. You handled it and you threw it off. In the same way, all kinds of experiences have come, and we have come to certain conclusions. We do not know the implications of these conclusions, and therefore we do not benefit from them. Precious things we throw away. And I say, if you ever believe that you will attain to an ideal, remember this. This shows that the ideal is yours here and now. That is the thing which should be impressed upon our own mind. Now, of course, such a subject as I am discussing this morning, do not seek him, just see him, presupposes that you really are anxious, at least you have some desire for finding God. If you do not have any desire, of course such, if I am persuasive enough, I might create within your mind at least a fleeting desire to find God. But I shall assume that you are all interested in finding God, in having some knowledge of God. The point is how you can do it, and that is where real help comes from this statement. I was saying that we are potentially perfect. The perfection is here now. And I also say that if it is assumed that God would be perceived by us, then God is being perceived by us now. Further, this fact is corroborated by the truth that God is infinite and all-pervasive, and whatever we perceive must contain God, because He pervades that. All these facts are there. Then what is wanted in order to benefit from this kind of teaching is to change the attitude of mind. It is really more psychological than metaphysical, this fact. The benefit is psychological. Your attitude changes towards this whole problem of God realization. Nothing short of God realization would do. You must remember that. Nothing short of it would do. If you think that you will stop halfway, you say, well, that's only for a few. Many in Christian theology, oftentimes they speak of it. They say, well, mysticism or mystical perception, yes, there have been some mystics and they have claimed that they have seen God. And that's true, but mysticism is for the few. They are special people, they are born with special talents, and we don't have to think of them in relation to ourselves. We are born differently, that is to say, are made differently, and what we should do in this life is to practice in obedience to God. We should fulfill His commandments and His ordinances, and we should live the good life, and having lived the good life, we shall eventually reach after death that blessed state which is called living in heaven with God. We don't accept that view. See? We don't. We say that whatever you have here, you will also have there, and whatever you will have there, you will afterwards have here. There is no change. See? If you realize God here, then after you pass on, you will realize God over there, in heaven or not. If you realize this most blessed state here, then after you die, you will also have that most blessed state. Because some of you might think that what difference does it make whether we see God or not, provided we have realized the highest state of our being. Because you see, the destiny of the soul has been spoken of in various ways. It has been spoken of sometimes as God vision, or at-one-ment with God, communion with God, or sometimes identity with God, or sometimes been spoken of as a state, illumination, enlightenment. Buddha, he so emphasized this subjective state, he called that nirvana. Nirvana means that annihilation. All that is impermanent within us, in us, becomes annihilated completely. And what remains, he did not describe. Because if you are to describe anything, we would at once understand it in terms of our present experience, and objects of our present experience, in our unthinking way, appears only to be temporary. And he did not want to speak of nirvana or the contents of nirvana in terms of our present language or present understanding, lest we confuse these two things. But it is, you might say it is a state, because sometimes it is spoken of it as a bodhi, this state of enlightenment, illumination. You see? Or you might call it, as we oftentimes speak as mukti, liberation. That's a state. See? You could mention both these ways. And some of you might say, what difference does it make whether we see God here or not? Provided you realize a higher state by living in obedience to the Lord, I admit that. But if you go on living in obedience to the Lord, you will come to a point where you will find that God has become an object of your perception. Why do you think He, in whom we live, move, and have our being, as St. Paul said, He who is all around us, within us and outside us, because He being the infinite pervades everything. Why is it that we do not perceive Him? If your obedience is such that it is complete and perfect, so much so that it produces the most perfect condition for yourself, then what is this that will obstruct your vision of God, who is all the time with you, here and now? No, there would be then still something left with you, which is not in obedience to the Lord. The Lord said that we should love Him with our whole soul and our whole mind and our whole life and heart. I'm, of course, paraphrasing. Our whole being, in other words, we are asked to love Him. That was His first commandment. And then He said that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. Second commandment. First commandment, if our thought even for a moment goes to something else, then that is breaking of the commandment of the Lord. Now let us see how we obey Him to this extent. And if you are not aware of your body, aware of anything else, then you will necessarily be aware of God. God vision would come to you. Let us not make this distinction. Oftentimes we think, all that is wanted, we live a good life, and that's enough. No, that is not enough. So much is spoken here. People are coming to this conclusion that there must be a spiritual revival. Without that, the present problem cannot be solved. Yes, that's just right. But the thing that amazes me is the complete obtuse understanding of what that spiritual awakening or spiritual living is. Not just being good and not just feeling a little sentiment for your neighbor and doing a little charity and this and that, that's not spirituality enough. If you ask me, is it not enough if we do that much, would not the world be changed? No, the world won't be changed. You are still intensely selfish. As long as you feel that you have a body and it has to be fed and it has to be clothed and it has to be medicined, you are a selfish person. And it is just a question of time before this selfishness will grow into a big tree again. No, just don't do. It is the thing, it requires for the utmost sacrifice. Look, a person like Christ comes to the world, he does not possess anything. He sacrifices himself. Hundreds and thousands follow in his footsteps. And yet consider how much of spirituality and good life has the West found so far. Just see how much has been done in order to correct this present state of things. How much, and yet what meager result has come. So if we want to change the present poisonous states of the world, the antidote has to be a most powerful thing. And the spiritual awakening that will change the face of things has to be so profound and so powerful that it has to be 1,000 times more than in any spiritual awakening in the past ages. It has to be so. Do you understand how much is called for from us? No, that good life is not enough. We have to be able to say, God alone exists. For me, nothing else exists. All these beings are God Himself. All whomsoever I see is God Himself. And I love Him and I serve Him. I have nothing to call my own. That is the spiritual awakening when that has been actually realized. We start with that, but there has to be an actual realization of this. So you see, many people just have, to begin with, a very flimsy idea of what that spirituality is. That makes a great difficulty. Somehow a sort of hunger has to come. It may come in various ways. Either you are eager for truth and you would not be satisfied with anything which is not true. You very soon realize truth to be truth must be permanent. An impermanent truth is no truth at all. Well, if you want to call it truth, you will call it impermanent truth, relative truth. Relative truth is not the thing which will give you the satisfaction which you are seeking. It has to be a permanent, eternal truth. And whatever is not eternal, your heart does not want it. It says, no, that won't do. You are made for love. You think that human love, however wonderful it is, it comes to an end. Either the persons change or death intervenes. You say, that is not for me. Is there someone permanent, eternal, whom I can love? Then that would be permanent. Therefore, your heart will go towards God, who is, by definition, permanent, eternal. I am not raising here the question whether God exists or doesn't exist. We are taking for granted that He exists. Why God exists, we can prove to ourselves by a little effort. But then this is not the point this morning. So our heart craves for something which is eternal, permanent and perfect. Nothing that is short of these would satisfy us. We create this hunger within ourselves. They say that you have to begin with something. Just at least you should have a spark of fire so that you could blow at it and gradually make it blaze. You have to begin with a fire. If there is no fire, just merely blowing at it, you could not make anything ignite. But the fire is within everybody, that is fortunate, and therefore by a little effort it can be ignited. It is said sometimes that if you come in contact with people who are spiritual, then their association will kindle this fire of spirituality within you. They say that that is a sure means. Or go to places where spiritual people have lived, or where spiritual people come and worship. There are churches and places and temples and mosques where you can go, where for some reason very good people have come and worshipped, and their presence of God has become manifest. God, as it were, out of compassion for those who worship Him, He is pleased to express Himself there, so His presence is felt more keenly. If you are seeking knowledge of God, before you read books and before you argue and before you begin to say, oh, God exists, doesn't exist, religion is not, follow the real thing, and the real thing is to find people and places where God has become manifest. That's the way to go about it. You see, in religion, we, ignorant people, have very little thing to say. We cannot say, no, I shall search for like this. I shall search like this. Well, what do you mean by I shall search like this? Do you think it is for you ignorant person to dictate how you will search God? You have to learn those things. It is as if a little boy goes and to a great scientist. No, I shall make researches in this way. And brings a few sticks and begin to tie them up, and I am a scientific researcher. See, you cannot do that. You have to learn these things. You have to learn how to find God. All that I see here, people sit after a few cocktails and begin to indulge in all kinds of metaphysical arguments, and they banish God or welcome God, and they think they are doing wonderful things. You think that way anything great and good can be attained? Don't for a moment think that. That's just self-deception. All the time, all the world over, people have done those things, reaching nothing. But find the places. You have to search for them. There are places. I have gone to some churches here. God is vividly present in them. You might say that's my personal reaction. Yes, I have to admit that. But you might also try. You might also find some places. In nature, where people have never gone, in some places also, you can discover the presence of God. Of course, presence of God is everywhere. But then you cannot find it everywhere, yet in some places you feel it vividly. It seems that God himself has come closer to you. You see, you can meet, either you go to him or he comes to you, or both come together, towards each other. Well, it seems in some places God comes towards us. There are places like this. Find people like this. Not who can give you good arguments, but who can give you, make you feel the presence of God. Their life has become, as it were, a temple of God, and in that God shines. God is manifest. Associate with them. Then you will find, by sympathetic reverberation, your heart will wake up. Yes. And that would be the first spark of fire. And then you make it blaze. If you dwell upon it, you find that gradually it has become a blazing fire. Then the fun begins. Where is he? How can I find him? They will tell you, oh, he is far off, very deep, deep, deep. They will say, just consider, there is this layer of matter first. And how thick is that layer? It is so thick, it never comes to an end if you go on digging into matter to find God. Have you ever done? That's the trouble. You go on analyzing matter, all that you will come to is a more matter, finer form, but matter. You won't ever come to anything else. Some people think that if they continue to analyze matter, they will come to life, and from life they will come to mind, and to intelligence, and to spirit. It is just a matter of digging deeper and deeper. No. If you dig into matter, you will come to finer form of matter, but nothing else. Maybe I am becoming dogmatic. I don't think so. But however, I am not impressing this upon you, but even if you think this matter is hiding the face of God, how are you going to penetrate matter? Then there is mind itself. Deep, deep mind, layer after layer. How to penetrate this? Beyond matter and mind is spirit. Layer after layer, you have to remove before you are able to come to him. That, you see, that makes things rather difficult sounding, isn't it? It's tremendous, God realized. People practice hard austerities, years and years and years of meditation, practice devotion, and all these years go on, and you ask them, how about it? How much? Far off. Even some people even say this. I hope I am sounding quite discouraging. Some even say this, that the more you search him, the farther he goes. In the beginning he seemed to be rather close at hand. But as you began to travel towards him, he just disappeared. Or he went farther and farther and farther and farther off. And that's a very common statement spiritual aspirants make. That's a fact. And why so? Because you see, in the beginning, I think the Lord gives us a little encouragement, coming closer to us. And then when He's got us in His grip, He says, well, now He is hooked. I don't have to be too kind and gentle to Him. And so He begins to assume His real proportions. You see, this jokes apart, but it is not all a joke. Not all a joke. Because you see, we have to change considerably before we are able to perceive God, and that perception can be permanent with us. You have to admit it, that you have to become infinite in order to be able to contain the infinite within you. And we are finite, even the best of us now. You can imagine what tremendous change there has to be before the culmination is reached. And so then, God has to take us to these changes. In Christian mysticism they speak of these states. They speak that first comes sort of illumination, the first experience of God, then comes the period of purgation. Most difficult time, great suffering, and years sometimes are required to pass to that stage. Then comes the at-one-ment with God, the highest condition. Well, whatever that might be, this is a fact that we have to undergo changes, and as we begin to improve, we find that God is just disappearing. In other words, we begin to realize what God truly is. And of course there comes a sort of self-estimation, and we find that we are far off from Him. Not that we are really losing ground, we are gaining ground, but then we know what the situation is now. All these are awfully discouraging. Some of our philosophers and sages have said that this kind of discouragement and even this long period of struggle can be somewhat curtailed, if not even eliminated, if we grasp hold by one supreme effort of conviction, or as some will say, faith. The fundamental fact is what I started with, that all that we perceive is God Himself. Now, always, there has been a little mistake, that's all. Instead of knowing Him as what He is, we have taken Him for somebody else. And that we ourselves, being a part of Him and identical with Him, we are capable now to perceive Him. It has to be an action on both sides. The subject says, do not seek Him, just see Him. Why do not seek Him? Because when you say to yourself, I am seeking Him, you are telling your mind that He is not in what I am perceiving now. I am not perceiving now. You see, you started with this wrong idea. Ayam eva hite vanna samadhim manutistati. A great teacher said to a royal pupil, he said, O king, this is your bondage that you are trying to realize, samadhi. Samadhi is that state of God vision that you are trying to realize. This is your bondage. You think that you are not seeing God. You are not capable of seeing God now. You think you have to change yourself. You have to find where God is hidden there. And at once you pile up all these difficulties upon yourself, and thereby you cripple your own ability to see God. That is the bondage. Ayam eva hite vanna samadhi manutistati. Now if I say to myself instead that God is ever present before me, God is being perceived by me every moment, that all that is God, all that is perceived by me is God Himself and nothing else. If I could say that to myself, all that I should have to do is to strain my eyes a little when I look at you, and instead of thinking you as a man or woman or good or bad or old or young and mortal or immortal, any such thing, I shall just hear is God Himself looking at me through all these eyes. All these hands are the hands of God, all the feet are the feet of God. You remember, oftentimes I quote a line from Vivekananda. And Sahasra Shirsha Purusha Sahasraksha Sahasrapat Sobhumo Sarvata Spristva Vaittatishta Dasangalam. He is this Purusha, this person, with 1,000 heads, 1,000 eyes, 1,000 feet, and 1,000 hands. He pervades the whole universe with his being, and also exceeds this universe. That's it. If you could make yourself say that, there is a supreme effort. And from that point on, you never say, let go. Never allow the mind to go back to the old way of thinking. You just say, I am not seeing Smith or Dudley or any such thing. I am seeing the Lord. I am hearing the voice of the Lord. These are the feet of the Lord. They are walking the streets. These are the mouths of the Lord. They are eating the dinner that I have prepared. Everywhere you look, you say, this is God himself. And what about all these men and women and birds and beasts and matter and mind and all these things? No. That was all a mistake. All a thorough mistake. Actually speaking, it is just one God, manifested in these infinite forms. Now suppose you do that. You probably say, well, if I do it, I admit wonderful things might happen. But I don't think I can do it. It is not just practical, Swami. Your Swami Vivekananda may have said it and you may like it, but it is not just practical. Practical is a word which has been very wrongly used often. When a person it is not practical, it means he doesn't want to do it. See, he has set a limit to his power, he has decided he will only do this much and no more than that. That's all what he means by being practical. Practical, my eye, practical. Practical? Today that is not practical. He says, I cannot do that. I have to think my child is my child, husband is my husband, and wife is my wife. How shall I go and carry on this? Well, when you will breathe your last, who will do all these things for you? Is that very practical? We cannot do anything worthwhile. You see, other things we have to do, other ways we have to think. When death comes, there is not even a second time left for us to argue with death. Says, well, now wait, brother. Don't be in a hurry. Now, then you become very practical indeed. There is no one so foolish as a man. Man has no justification for being so foolish. You can be. But you see, it is a wrestling with the mind, a continuous wrestling with the mind. Mind will go back to the old rut of thinking. Wrong thinking. There is just only one being. 1,000 heads with 1,000 heads and 1,000 feet and 1,000 hands, 1,000 eyes and 1,000 ears. One being. If you say that that's not proved, what is proved? If you are living by proof, yes, I shall throw the challenge at you. You live by proof, and you will find everything that you are doing is unproven. Quit doing it. Be truthful. Be honest with yourself. Then also you will realize this one being with 1,000 feet and 1,000 hands. You see, but you don't want to do it. When these truths are said, you want proof. And when you live your unintelligent life, you don't care for proof. But I think most of you believe in the existence of God, that He pervades the whole being. And then I say, why don't you accept it now? Don't ask yourself, I have not attained that power by which you can see God here and now. Don't bother about it. Just start seeing God, recognizing His presence. Or at first you won't see this shining being everywhere. But what prevents you from recognizing this fact that every form is a form of God, that within every form God Himself dwells, recognize it first. And tell yourself, whenever you look at any person, this is God Himself. Of course your brain might burst. What of it? Another brain would come. Another brain would come. What is wanted is there a certain sincerity of thought, I mean, you could not in the morning begin to say everybody is God, and in the evening begin to think that everybody is a devil. You just couldn't do it. You could not in the morning say, I am not this body, and I am really a fragment of divinity. That's my nature, beyond the body and the mind. In the morning and in the evening, you begin to think you are a big body which has to be filled with steaks and onions. That would not do. Okay, so you say, I am not suggesting that you should not eat, but you should not eat in the way an animal person eats. No. That is a kind of eating. You say, I am not eating. Even while you are eating, you say, it is not I who am eating, it is the body that is taking the food. Then this eagerness goes away from the tongue and the mouth and the lips, in which you get involved. You see, that is another kind of eating, another kind of drinking, another kind of speaking, another kind of functioning in the senses, in which you are a part. If you say all fun is gone out, if you want fun in the outside, you are not ready for this. You are then, you see, violating the truth which you are practicing. You cannot do it. You have to be sincere. It can be done, I have known people who have done that. Therefore, I am forced to believe that it is true. It can be practiced. It's not difficult, it's the easiest of all things. Now consider, you have in this country so many Christian scientists. Then you have got Home of Truths people, their number is small, I imagine. Then you have Unity, then you have got New Thought, all kinds of things of that, who believe that the soul is perfect, infinite, eternal. Continually they are mouthing, this is not matter, and so on. Well, take this seriously. If the soul is not the body, if I am not matter, I am not the body, then let me live up to this profession of faith. Let me look upon everybody as spirit, truly. And so when you practice those things, slowly you find that your whole process of thought is changed. And God, who seemed far off, within a short time he seems to be very close. Now I am really making this distinction. I am not saying that every one of you should practice it, because what one should practice, it depends on his wish. If you don't want to practice it, there are other kinds of spiritual practices. But I do say this, that if we can practice it, then our practice will bear quick fruits, quick results. Quick results would come. Because this is grasping the most fundamental of truths. There is no compromise in it, that is going to the very root of the matter. Yes, everyone is God because God alone is. If I accept this, if I try to perceive it, I am trying to perceive the fundamental truth, the highest truth. I am also not this body and the mind, and if I accept that, that is also the most fundamental truth. So you start doing it. Now, you see what will happen. Everything becomes sacred for you then. Holy, sacred. Doesn't it? Dining room is really a chapel, worship room. Here the Lord himself is partaking of the offerings that you have put before him. When a person eats, it is not he eats. Does he eat? No, even ordinary person, all he does, puts it in this aperture in his face, and up from here up to here, a little sensation then goes there, and what happens, you at first may feel a little weight there, that afterwards, what transformation takes place? Food becomes converted to blood. That blood, what it does to you, to your body, to your mind, to you as the thinker. Do you know all these processes? Then would you say that you have eaten? You who only are concerned with a part of the body from lips to the gullet, that's all. You say you have eaten this food? Then who is doing all kinds of things with this food in which you have stored up in your belly? He who is taking care of all things, he is really the receiver of this food. Won't you say that? He is is doing all these things, you do not know what is food for. All that you know is probably you are interested in the flavor of the food. That it gives you nourishment, a secondary thought. But as long as you have a certain quantity, and that quantity is full of flavor as you want it, you are satisfied with it. But that was not what the food is meant for. All the transformation that it undergoes and all the things that it does in this body, you do not even know all these things. So then he who knows all these things, he who changes this food, uses this food, for him is that food. He who presides over this form, this living body, this mind and everything, because food is not just concerned with the body, food also goes into the thought. So then food is concerned with the mind and body. He who presides over the mind and the body, for him is this food. For him are all these sense experiences. For him are all the thoughts and all the emotions and all the feelings and all the actions. Not for you, the so-called conscious being. You are not the eater. You are an interloper. You are taking credit for something which is not yours. It was not meant for you. There is a story. In an oriental country, a big potentate was riding along a street on an ass. You know, the ass was considered quite a mount in those days. When people from both sides began to bow and salam, the ass began to think, oh my, look what, why? Everybody is saluting me, I must be somebody. The fool, as he did not know, of course, being an ass, it was not expected to know, that the salutation was on his rider, to his rider, not to himself. We think, this little ego, this little body thinks all these things are for it. Do you think so? No. For him who rides this. Nothing mystical about it, it is just a little more thinking than we are accustomed to do. Little more thinking. And you find this is all for someone deep, deep down. Somewhere there is a being who presides over body and mind and life. He is the soul, he is the self, the Atman, as we say in Sanskrit. And for whom? For him are all these things. He is the eater of everything. Yes. He is the hearer, he is the seer, for him everything. Not for this ego, who is just as I said, he is just only somehow, he interposes himself, it is not meant for him. But yet he wants to take the credit of all this. And he thinks it is meant for him. No, not meant for him. Now, you know, these simple things, if we can think about, then we can grasp also these other things, big things. Yes, everywhere. Now, I am uttering these words, but are they coming from this ego? I know they are not coming from this ego. You can realize a state in which you will find that you are just the spectator of things, somebody else is speaking. Speech is rising from a very, very deep, 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 deep source. Who is thinking and who is transforming these thoughts into this articulate speech? Who is gathering the words and making the sentences? Am I this ego? No. This ego is nothing. From deep, deep down everything originates. And you are listening, if I think foolishly that you, the superficial being, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, and listening to me, I must be an utter fool. God is speaking unto God. That's called creation. Whole thing is God is speaking unto God. In Christianity you have the conception that God sacrifices himself to himself. That is called crucifixion of the Christ. That's called salvation of man. That's the scheme of this universe. God speaking unto God. God is the speaker and God is the listener. That would be the truth. If you say there is not much fun in it, what do you know of fun? What do you know of fun? Pigs lying, wallowing in the mire. What fun do they know? Of course they squeal and they think they are having wonderful time. And when we are bound in these senses and life just clubbed in flesh, what fun do you know, you think? That's fun, that's fun. If you just could even catch a glimpse of that state beyond the senses, you will burst with joy. Then you will know what fun is. You will find as if every part of your body is exploding. And in order to contain that joy also requires a great deal of training. Well, you see, we don't know. But when you practice this, practice truth, self-evident truth, practice it, and by the fruit of this practice you know the efficacy of this truth and the value of that truth. That sameness of vision, where you see this one being existent in all, purifies the mind. Hatred goes, craving goes, likes, dislikes go. When you recognize that a person is really the spirit, neither the body and the mind, you will find that your biggest load had fallen off your shoulders. You will find you are not imprisoned in this body anymore. Freedom will come. You will begin to find things which you could never dream of they are existing. You could see deep, deep into the very center of being. And mind, remember this, in the center of beings everything is most wonderful. It is only on the surface that things are unpleasant. But we attain to this profound vision. And of course vision of the truth. And when you do that, as I said, God is not far off. If I begin to see that here is God, I feel that I am surrounded by Him. Even as you ordinarily know we are surrounded by space. And if instead of that we feel that we are surrounded by Him, by God, who is infinite peace, infinite goodness, infinite light, infinite joy, infinite love and beauty and sweetness. Just imagine this, what an existence that is. If you say, well, that's just dreaming of something which is not real, I say, test it, and you will find this is the real. What you think you are perceiving now is unreal. And consider the exaltation of your own being. You are not, if you just think in this term, you could not think of yourself as a grasping being, an eating being, and a sleeping being, and miserable being, and snatching at little things. Like a dog being pursued, and yet in its hunger it tries to snatch at little things it can find. A running dog, that is the kind of life we are living. But no, when you once recognize the truth about everybody, including yourself, you will find infinite peace and strength has come. Not come, you discover that it is already there. Death has not any fear for you, nor any condition of living. No one can frighten you, no one can bind you. You have infinite freedom, infinite kindness within you. Because why should not there be kindness? There is a possibility of indifference or cruelty there, in that sense of unity. So you see, from whichever direction you look, from the direction of your self-improvement, of moral living, of being helpful to others, of serving others, or perceiving of truth, this really tells you the most fundamental practice. Do not seek Him, just see Him. Rub your eyes, let the scales fall off, and that which is appearing to you as the world and men and bird and beast will appear you to the living, shining God. He is here now. But you see, it has to be practiced in everything, in your thought, in your feeling, and in your action. Start with action. Whenever you do anything to God, even if you give a glass of water to somebody's hand, just say to yourself, I am giving this glass of water to God Himself. Say this to yourself. And persuade that it is so. Persuade yourself that it is so. Don't just merely repeat like a formula, although even that is better than repeating wrong formulas. If you prepare dinner, say, I am preparing dinner for the Lord, you see somebody eating, the Lord Himself is taking food. He who dwells in every form. Himself formless, he dwells in every form. Say this to yourself. Say this about yourself, about others. Continually you do this and try to keep in the wake of this thought. Mind forgets, that's the first difficulty. Then mind gets tired out. When it is tired out, you cannot force it. But be sure that it does not take to the old habit of thinking. Let it get tired out and take it rest. The moment it is revived, again make it think the right way. And let each one do his own best. And you will be surprised to find how religious you have become, how spiritual you have become, how these things which all the religions have spoken about God, about the blessed life of knowing God, serving Him, how all these things are becoming realistic to you. Everybody is religious, everybody is spiritual, but some have chosen to neglect their own nature, that's all. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithivi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishve Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Same Shantirevi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in heaven, peace is in the sky, on the earth and in the waters. The herbs, the plants and the trees are all full of peace. The gods are peaceful. Everything in the universe is pervaded by peace. May this eternal, universal peace enter our soul and being. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.